Y'all hear me? Is that a no? Test, test. Are we good? There we go. Okay. It is truly a blessing to be able to speak tonight to y'all. And I want to reiterate what was read this morning, that I really do appreciate and am absolutely grateful for y'all accepting me this summer into y'all's church family, and for all of the kindness that y'all have shown over the course of the very busy schedule of what's been this summer for me. Also, I want to mention the original kind of plan for tonight of what would have been. It would have been kind of a church camp recap and also a review of the mission trip, but Brent and Jackson decided to kind of push that off, and so I had originally prepared to be a little bit shorter with my lessons, so tonight I'm here and I can talk as long as I want to. On a real note, I'll be quick and to the point tonight. It shouldn't take that long, but see me at the end of the service if I talked too long. You see, I played a ton of sports growing up. From the time that I could really walk, I absolutely loved to watch football. You see, I would watch Alabama on SEC on CBS, and it was kind of when they would start their dynasty, and I would beg Mom to let me play, and the answer was always no. Eventually, she decided to let me and Chandler start playing tackle football, and I did that through my 8th grade year. I also decided to try soccer for one day, and it was half a day to be exact. It was 2 matches. I had a friend, and the soccer team at school needed one more player for them to qualify for this tournament. And so for some reason, they decided to let me play, and I had never touched a soccer ball before. I'll just be honest. So we get out there, and we're already losing like 9-1, and I scored in the wrong goal. So that was the end of my soccer career. You see, I also golfed for a couple of years in high school on the golf team, and I specifically joined the team because we got a new coach, and I really loved this teacher who ended up being the coach. And so I decided to join the golf team specifically for social reasons, to just kind of chill out after a long day of school. And as you can imagine, I didn't take it very seriously and never ending up even playing a match, quite frankly. But there's one sport that I really loved to play more than anything, and that was basketball. You see, I played growing up in the elementary leagues. I was a baller when I was younger, but I got to be in the 7th grade, and it was time to actually try out for a real team. So I was nervous, and I go into tryouts, and I somehow find a way to make the team. So we start the season, and I didn't get much playing time. I wasn't expecting to. I was just trying to improve for the next year. And we get a long way through the season, and I realized we were terrible. We had all this talent in the world, it seemed, for a middle school team. We had some insanely tall people for middle schoolers. We had athleticism all around the court, but we just couldn't piece together wins. It was towards the end of the school year. We might have had 5 or so games left, excluding tournaments, but we were playing our crosstown rivals. We were the private school in our city, and we were playing the much larger public school. And it's embarrassing to say, but we were aiming for just our 3rd win of the season. Like I said, we were terrible. We go to their gym, and they've got a lot of fans at the game. Of course, just about every parent is there cheering us on towards our 3rd win, hopefully. And it's a tight game back and forth. And it's very competitive until that buzzer sounds. Okay, overtime. It's a tie game. All right, guys, it's time to kind of lock in for a couple more minutes and get this win. Until that buzzer sounded. And We lost again for like the 23rd time, to be serious. You see, all of us, especially us on the bench, knew it was not going to be a fun post-game speech. Of course, when you're on the bench the entire game, you can kind of feel how your coach is feeling at the moment. You can kind of hear things that he says under his breath a little bit and not, out loud. And so you just know it's not going to be a fun post-game speech. We're all sitting down in this away locker room, and our coach walks in. He says, "The only thing I have to say is before you leave, I want you to stop and look in that mirror on the wall and look at the name on your jersey and ask yourself, do I represent it well?" He goes on to say, "I know some of y'all are going to walk straight out the door without thinking about it." The idea behind this statement by our coach was to make us think about the school that we represented. And it made sense athletically. We had, at least in high school, we had a ton of state championships. We had a ton of players who went on to play D1 at multiple schools, and we took a lot of pride in our athletics. But there was a bigger emphasis on our character. See, when talking about tonight and this idea of looking in the mirror, I want to ask the question, whose name are you wearing spiritually? In Acts chapter 11, we see Barnabas and Paul, they go to Antioch. And the church in Antioch, it's interesting because it started because of the persecution of the church right after the stoning of Stephen. People scattered across all these different nations, and we see the church at Antioch is formed. Barnabas goes there first, and he eventually comes back and gets Paul to go with them, and they end up staying for a year. Acts chapter 11 and verse 26, let's see what it has to say. "And when he had found them, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year they met with the church and taught a great many people. And in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians." You see, this idea is so cool that something that started with persecution ended up creating a new name for the disciples of God. And it's a name that still rings true today. It's a name that proclaims Christ, that shows who your identity is found in. Imagine a situation with me for a second. It might sound odd, but just follow me. Close your eyes if you have to. Everyone in the world walks around with a shirt of the greatest love in their life. You're at Food Line, you're just trying to pick up a few quick groceries, and you see someone you went to high school with maybe, and you haven't seen them in years, and they have a shirt that they're wearing, and it's a family portrait. They've got their wife, they've got their kids, they've got their dog, and maybe their cat, but you're like, "Hey, we went to high school together." And he goes on to talk about how much he loves his family and how they are such a joy in his life. You go over to the next aisle and you see that person who's wearing the logo of their company on their shirt. And you ask them, "Hey man, how's work going?" And they reply, "Oh, it's going great. We've got this going on. We've made this much money this year. Things are just really going good at work. I love it there." You might end up on the other side of the grocery store, and you see that individual wearing the shirt of their favorite sports team. "Hey man, that was a great game the other night. Roll Tide, brother." And then at the other end of the store, you hear someone say, "Go Vols," unfortunately. But then you might also get down to the checkout line, and you see that one person, and it's like, "Man, that is such a cool shirt you've got on." Like that new Marvel movie that just came out, that's pretty good. Like the MCU is kind of going down, but I mean, I've loved watching that for years. Like I grew up on Batman, like such a cool character to follow. Or I just really love those Legos. Like I started when I was a kid, and now I've got this huge collection. And that's just a hobby that I love to enjoy. The real question I want to ask with this scenario is, how many of us would be wearing a shirt that says something about Jesus on it. A shirt that might say, "Oh, how I love Jesus. Jesus, He's the King of my heart. He's the wonderful, merciful Savior, the precious Redeemer and friend. He's the Prince of Peace. He's the Alpha and Omega. He's the beginning and the end. He's the beautiful Lamb of God." You know, our God is an awesome God who reigns in heaven. And Jesus, you are all to us. You see, while that situation might not be the most realistic because you can't make everyone in the world do something, there is a lot of truth to that scenario. Whether we like it or not, we walk around showing others what we love. Jesus said in John chapter 13 and verse 35, "By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." In Romans chapter 12, Paul describes the marks of a true Christian in verses 9 through 21. And I'm just going to read off these characteristics that he mentions. True Christians, they have genuine love. They hate evil. They cling to what is good. They love one another. They honor people. They have a zeal to serve. They are patient in trials, joyful and hopeful, constant in prayer, seeking the needs of others. They bless even the people that persecute them. They rejoice and comfort people despite their circumstances. They live in harmony. They are not arrogant. They don't take revenge for themselves. They live peaceably with everyone. They feed their enemies, and they don't overcome evil with evil, but rather evil with good. You see, these actions of a true Christian are evident to everyone because they are meant to stick out for a reason. You could go down the list that I just gave, and you can tell if someone has that quality or not. You can think about that coworker and think if they have a genuine love for people. You could think about that long-lost cousin you might have, and if they are joyful. You can tell by the smile that they constantly have on their face. Or you can tell by that person who's struggling with an illness if they are constant in prayer. These things are evident to us, but tonight, I don't want you to think about the person that you know that might or might not have these qualities. I want you to look at yourself in the mirror and see if you are truly wearing the name of a Christian. To first answer this problem, you have to ask yourself, how often do I look in the mirror? Guys, I get it. Life gets busy. You're listening to someone tonight who genuinely loves to be busy all the time. Not in a stressful way, but loves to be out and about, hanging out with friends, doing this, doing that, and at the end of the day going home and just crashing in bed because the day was so fun. Tonight, however, forget the busy work week that's coming up and the deadlines and the schedules. Focus on reflecting on yourself tonight instead. 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5, if you want to turn over there. This is the Apostle Paul. This is his second letter to the church in Corinth. 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5 says, "Examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves, or do you not realize this about yourselves, that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet the test." Examine and test your faith. We know from the book of James that whenever your faith is put to the test, that it produces endurance. And to let that endurance have its full effect on you. You see, when we're talking about examining ourselves, we also have to remember that we're commanded to do it on a weekly basis. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, he's talking to them about the mockery of the Lord's Supper that they've made it. This is what he has to say in verse 27 on. "Whoever therefore eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty concerning the body and the blood of the Lord. Let a person examine himself then, and so eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. That is why so many of you are weak and ill, and some have died. But if we judge ourselves truly, we would not be judged. But when we are judged by the Lord, we are disciplined so that we may not be condemned along with the world. When we partake of the Lord's Supper each Sunday, we need to stop and we need to reflect on our lives and then partake of it. I also get it. It's hard to take that time to stop and to pause because, you're worried about wanting to go get Mexican after church. You're worried on if the Titans are actually going to show up and play today. And there might be some even bigger worries that you have in your life. But take the time on Sunday to stop and to examine yourselves and then partake of the Lord's Supper. Because Christ came and He lived and He died for you. And that's the whole purpose in remembering Him during the Lord's Supper. So when it comes to reflecting each week, you've got to ultimately ask yourself, what changes do I need to make? Turning over to Colossians chapter 3, starting in verse 1, it's a lengthy read, but I feel like it's appropriate to read the full passage. Starting in verse 1, going through verse 14. If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, and you also will appear with Him in glory. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming. In these you too once walked, when you were living in them, but now you must put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its Creator. Here there is not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free, but Christ is all and end all. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. If one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. Above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. You see, we're first instructed by the Apostle Paul to set our minds on spiritual things and not of the things of this world. The Hebrew author also presents this idea that you're running a race spiritually, and you need to lay aside the weight of the sin that entangles you, and you need to look to Jesus for this race. Paul goes on in Colossians to tell us to put these worldly things to death. And it's also the idea that it's a lot easier to do that whenever we are focused on Christ. Whenever we have laid aside these things and fixed our eyes on the founder and perfecter of our faith. He says to put to death sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, covetousness, anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk. But rather, instead of just throwing those things to the side, we need to replace them with compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, forgiveness, but most importantly, love. Like Jesus said, people will know if you're Christians by your love. So tonight, examine yourself. Look in the mirror. If you're looking in the mirror right now and you just haven't even put on the name of Christ through baptism, we can fix that tonight. If you have done that and you know that others just don't see Christ through you, whether it's it's at work or at school or just out and about, even just grocery shopping. We can also talk about that tonight. And we can talk about the change that needs to happen because you've taken the time to stop and to reflect and to examine yourselves after looking in the mirror. Going back to that story I told to start this lesson, as a seventh grader, I took the time to kind of sit back and watch people. And as people started to get up and gather their things, one by one, the majority, the rest of the team, they walked out the door without taking the time to stop and to look in the mirror, specifically at the name on their chest. So tonight, whose name are you wearing? And can you see that in the mirror? If that's not Christ, then some things need to change. If you have a need tonight, please come as we stand and as we sing.